dream theory. Early on, Freud distinguishes between two different kinds of mental functioning or mentation. In the unconscious, primary process, in the conscious ego, secondary process thinking. Secondary process thinking is the logical, reality-oriented thinking of everyday life. Something can't be both A and non-A. It operates according to the principle of Aristotelian logic, the principle of non-contradiction. But Freud discovers that in the unconscious there's this very different type of mentation that he called primary process, where contradictions can exist side by side. I can be here and there, I can be a man and a woman, I can be alive and dead. So the principle of non-contradiction does not apply in the primary process. And the mechanisms that govern this primary process thinking are also, which actually constitute the laws of the unconscious mind that Freud discovers. These are also the five components of what Freud called the dream work, the mechanisms that lead to the formation of dreams. But first of all, it's important to note that in his early work, I mean, the interpretation of dreams was written in 1900. In his early work, Freud describes the unconscious as lawful. He discovers the laws that govern it. Condensation, displacement, plastic representation, symbolism, secondary revision are the five components of the dream work and the five laws of the unconscious mind. So the unconscious mind is lawful. It's orderly. And therefore you can imagine an artist wanting to dip into it in order to pull out some kind of creative organization or creative principle. Freud really changes his attitude towards the unconscious. By 1923, instead of describing it as ordered by these lawful mechanisms, he describes it as a chaos, a cauldron of seething excitations. A cauldron of seething excitations. A cauldron connotes that thing that witches throw frogs into and stir. Seething. Snakes, animals, insects, seething. So the unconscious is this chaotic, threatening, seething witch's brew in 1923. I mean, the young Freud felt that society was too repressive. He wanted it to loosen up, especially with regard to sexuality. The older Freud, seeing the unconscious as a witch's brew, is developing a conservative attitude towards we need the social law, we need the superego to restrain and keep at bay the chaotic forces of the unconscious, which he now is associating with barbarism. He's now talking about the thin veneer of civilization, beneath which barbaric drives of sex and aggression exist. I guess it's not that uncommon for young men to be radical and older men to be conservative, but that certainly applies to Freud. But in the process, he changes his understanding of the unconscious mind from an orderly, creative thing to a chaotic thing. There's not enough in the psychoanalytic literature that has drawn attention to this major shift in Freud's attitude towards the unconscious mind. Okay, but let's go back and look at the laws of the unconscious then. First of all, condensation. Condensation affects disguise by substitution. But you substitute one thing for another on the basis of something that they have in common, a principle of similarity. The Russian linguist Roman Jakobson, and following him Jacques Lacan, understood that Freud, in talking about condensation, he's really just talking about metaphor, because that is what metaphor is. It is substitution based on a principle of similarity. So let's see how this works in dreams. All you can remember from your dream is that you seem to be spending hours in a shoe store, trying on one pair of shoes after another. You slip your foot into this shoe, and then you slip it out, and then you slip it into another shoe, and all night long it's this in-out. The foot is analogous, similar to the penis. The shoe is analogous to a vagina. It doesn't look like it has anything to do with sexual intercourse, but it's the old in-out all night long. Substitution has affected disguise on the basis of metaphor. That's condensation. The second mechanism is displacement. Here also disguise is affected by substitution, but the substitution is not on the basis of a similarity, but on the basis of contiguity. Not things that resemble each other, but things that go together. So A, B, C, D, E go together. They don't resemble. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 go together, but they don't resemble. So in your dream, all you remember is the smell of bacon pervading the house and the sizzling of the bacon on the stove. And you recount the dream, and I ask you for your associations, and you go from bacon to eggs, and then it hits you, oh my God, maybe my egg is fertilized, the condom broke. On the surface, it doesn't look like the dream has anything to do with fears of pregnancy, but you went from bacon to eggs. Bacon doesn't resemble eggs. Eggs don't resemble bacon, but they are contiguous. They go together, and disguise has been achieved on that basis. The third mechanism, plastic representation, simply means that the dream relies on a kind of picture language. Actually, Chinese contains pictographs, little pictures, as did Egyptian hieroglyphics. The dream simply works in this communication through a kind of picture language. The fourth element is symbolism, and here is where, in my opinion, Freud gets into trouble. People think that Jung had a concept of a collective unconscious and that Freud didn't. That's false. Freud, like Jung, did have a concept of a collective unconscious. Both Jung and Freud believed that when patients are not producing personal associations to their dreams, the analyst steps in with his knowledge of universal symbolism. For the Jungians, this is the universal knowledge of symbolism contained in world mythology. For Freud, the analyst steps in with his knowledge of this kind of universal symbolic language of the mind. I think this is chapter 10 in Freud's introductory lectures, devoted to symbolism. In all times, all places, all historical periods, knives, daggers, umbrellas have a phallic significance. Bags, containers have signify the vagina or the womb. Running up or running downstairs. Bang, 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 bang. Somebody's getting banged. This is intercourse. Snakes are going to have a phallic significance. Okay, Freud was very much under the influence of Wilhelm Steckel, who loved these automatic equations, as do these crappy books you can buy at the world's biggest bookstore, 1001 Dreams Interpreted. You dreamt of a tower, you look in the index, T tower. Ah, that's what it means. This, of course, is utter nonsense, but Freud fell for it to a certain degree, and in doing so, he departs from his overall method. There's a wonderful essay by the literary critic Kenneth Burke, written back in the 1930s, called Freud and the Analysis of Poetry. And Burke distinguishes two different kinds of literary interpretation: essentializing and contextualizing. And he says that Freud's overall method is a contextualizing method. Freudians don't know what dreams mean. We simply have a method of putting the dream in the context of the patient's own personal associations to the dream. So the analyst is writing the dream down as it's told, and then he asks the patient to associate, and the patient maybe skips something. Well, what about the taxi? And then just before the glass shattered, you said there was a little dog. What comes to mind about the little dog? The analyst is just asking questions to draw the patient out. Why? Because the mind is an association system. The mind is a system of associated elements, and the analyst is simply inviting associations. And the meaning of the dream sometimes emerges through these personal associations. Freud says sometimes the patient doesn't have any personal associations, so that's where I have to step in with my knowledge of the universal symbolism. And this is where Freud and Jung fall into what Burke calls essentializing, as opposed to contextualizing. And I think it's a mistake. Take a snake, for example. Sure, a snake could stand for a penis, but what if it's a boa constrictor that smothers you? Take away the S, you got mother. There may be no phallic significance to that snake at all. It may be about some encircling, squeezing, engulfing kind of thing that, or it may swallow you whole. Also, there's the snake that, what is it, the Asclepius, the medical symbol of healing?
Caduceus.
The Caduceus, yes. So a number of years ago, CBC producer Erica Ritter wanted to do a little series on dreams, and she had Dan Kapp on, who was a Jungian analyst. She had him in the previous week to talk about the Jungian approach to dreams, and she clearly found him much more satisfactory than she found me, because I just refused. I don't know what these things mean. So she gave me an example of a ship, sharp prow, plowing through the water. Surely that must be phallic, she says, plowing through the water, la mer, the mother's getting plowed by this sharp. I said, I don't know what it means. The patient's associations might go to the fact that it's a container ship, and the patient might be wondering whether there's anything in the hold or not. So then she gives me another example. A red fire engine streaking through narrow streets, bell clanging, smoke. Surely this red thing streaking through narrow streets with an erectable ladder, surely this is a sexual dream. And I said, I don't know what it means. I asked the patient, maybe the patient associates to help. The house of myself is burning down. Or maybe this is a person who feels in need of rescue every time she gets hot. I don't know. Who knows? We'll find out through the associations that the dream has. So I think Freud opens, in this one element, he opens the door to analyst authoritarianism and departs from the otherwise much more democratic and humble technique of simply realizing that the patient is the only expert on the patient's psyche. Okay, so that's the fourth. And then the fifth element is secondary revision. So I always say, imagine a lumber, a factory. What do you call those factories where the logs go in and at the end the timber comes out?
Sawmill.
A sawmill. So the raw trees are going in at this end, and the nice lumber boards are coming out at the other end. And think of these five things happening in between. First, the raw material is condensed, and then it's displaced, and then it's plastically represented, and then it's symbolized. And the fifth and final element is what Freud calls secondary revision. The message, the latent content, has been all chopped up and disarranged, because the latent message that generates the dream in the first place is unacceptable. It causes too much anxiety or guilt. I have death wishes towards my mother. This is unacceptable. I would wake up if that became conscious. The purpose of dreams is to allow sleep to continue, Freud says. And so it allows sleep together to continue by cloaking this message in such a way that it passes through the censorship and the alarms don't go off, and I'm able to go on sleeping. And I have a manifest dream, which is a disguised dream, disguised through all of these mechanisms. So the latent message has been chopped up, and now at the end it's given a certain order, but it's a false order. And I look at the dream, and I think I know what it means, because the secondary revision, the false ordering of the distorted pieces, has thrown me off. I don't ask any further questions. So, for example, I'm staying at a friend's in the countryside, and I come down in the morning and I said, last night I dreamt about a dream. I had a dream I was on a train all night long. And he says, oh, well, you just heard the 2:22. It comes through at 22 minutes after 2 every night, blows its whistle. That must be why. So, how are the Jays doing? We don't ask any further questions. We've identified the trigger of the dream. We've identified what Freud calls the day residue, something from the night before, the day before, that has triggered the dream. But this is simply tracing the cause of a dream, which psychoanalysis is not about. So that people show up on CBC reviewing the latest, being interviewed about the latest research from dream labs, REM states. And this is completely irrelevant. And yet these arrogant characters think that Freud's outmoded dream theory is, in the garbage. It's some 19th century, and they go on to talk about the dream physiology, the brain physiology of dreaming, which is completely irrelevant. Because psychoanalysis is not about the cause of dreams. The cause of my dream might have been the 2:22. It might have been the pizza I had before bed. Psychoanalysis is about the meaning of dreams, not about the cause of dreams. So, all right, the train whistle in the distance meant that I was having a dream about being on a train. But now ask me about the rest of the dream. Well, there was a murder on the train. Well, who got murdered? Well, it was this lady. Well, what did she know her? Did she remember or resemble anyone? What are your thoughts about the woman who got murdered? There was something about her glasses. These horn-rimmed... Oh, my mother just got new horn-rimmed glasses. Well, now we know it's mother who got murdered on the train, and we're moving on towards getting at the real interpretation of the dream. Okay, secondary revision, the false order that throws us off. If you trace the dream only to the trigger from the day before, the day residue, you've only done a pre-conscious level of interpretation. You have not gotten to the unconscious. What are dreams? Attempted disguised wish fulfillments. Why do if dreams are wish fulfillments, how come we have nightmares? Who could wish to be having that kind of torture and anxiety all night long? Freud gives two answers. He adds the word attempted. Attempted disguised hallucinatory wish fulfillments. Sometimes the attempt breaks down. The disguise is too thin, in which case it's an anxiety dream and you wake up sweating. The dream has failed. You've awakened. One explanation. The second explanation is if you dream of being, say, chased all night by the Hell's Angels who are going to do something terrible to you if they catch you, this is gratifying a superego wish. Dreams are wish fulfillments, but the wishes don't always come from the id. The wish can come from the superego. And a superego wish is a wish for torture, a wish for pain, a guilt-motivated wish for punishment. And the dream gratifies that by giving you a punishing dream. Okay? Attempted disguised hallucinatory wish fulfillments. Remember, dreams are hallucinations. Psychotics don't dream. Well, that's because all they do is dream. They've lost the distinction. And if a psychotic patient says, I had a dream, you know he's getting better. Because in saying, I had a dream, he's making a boundary between reality and dream. He's regaining the boundary. So we're all of us psychotic at night. And Freud gives us this way of understanding what's going on, which we can now apply not only to dreams, but we can apply to slips, and we can apply to the content of the psychoanalytic session, because like a dream, I mean, that is the correct way of psychoanalytic listening, to listen to everything as a dream, to listen to everything as a manifest content that disguises a latent content. This is called listening with the third ear, an attempt to get behind the manifest back to the latent, using the person's own associations, not our presumed understanding of what equals what. Okay? So that's a little thing about dream theory and how it's relevant to clinical work.